a simple grocery delivery set off a chain of events that culminated in the mysterious disappearance of a young engineer. Now, strange details were about to surface that would indicate he hadn't intended on vanishing. Something much more sinister had taken place within the desert that summer morning. What's going on, Midnight Mafia? Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I got a great story for you. But first, a couple announcements to make. First, Mystery Files is now going to be on podcasts. It's going to be on Spotify, on Amazon, on Apple, every podcast you can imagine, and it starts on Monday. Yep, Monday starting at 5 a.m. I'm going to start releasing stories 3 times a week. 2 of them will be stories that have been already done in audio format, but more, compressed and just sound better. And then the third story will be an audio only story that will not be shown here on YouTube. So hopefully that gives you incentive enough to hear new stories every week to go and subscribe to, it's called Mystery Files. I'll show you on the screen how it works. So like I said, it's called Mystery Files, but this time the word mystery files and then a little, straight up slash and then Mr. E Files. I did that purely for the algorithm and, hopefully to get noticed by people that type in mystery. We'll see. The second announcement, and this one is truly huge, is, okay, as some of you know, I have a backup channel called Mr. Ballen's Apprentice. It started as Budget Ballin' and it kind of evolved once he actually subscribed and commented on it. And it's basically just where I re-upload everything that's on Mr. E File. So I was like, you know what? Enough re-uploads, okay? Let's make this into an actual thing. But it's gonna be mostly strange, paranormal, mysterious, supernatural, Bigfoot, all these things, and it's called Shadows in the Wild. And as of tomorrow, it'll be uploaded at 2 p.m. We're going to be doing one of those a week, every week now too. So you guys are getting like 3 new stories from me a week if you also listen on podcasts. So I hope you guys really appreciate that and enjoy all the stories to come. But that's enough ado. So without any further ado, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. Daniel Robinson was the youngest of 4 children, and Daniel was born a little bit different than the other children. You see, he was unique in the way where he only had one arm, but this inspired him to work even harder. His right arm came to an end right above his wrist, but he was still determined to achieve goals and was a real go-getter. And according to his father, David Robinson, he taught himself to play video games and musical instruments and even participated in the marching band and playing football. I mean, think about it. That is a wonderful young man. And Daniel went on to graduate with honors from a prestigious college, where he joined a fraternity and majored actually in archaeology. So when he was offered a position as a field hydrogeologist with Matrix New World Engineering, Daniel accepted the dream job, eager to begin his new career. Okay, so now we have Daniel, who was living in Buckeye, Arizona, doing his dream job, and his father David was still living in Columbia, South Carolina. And perhaps the unusual weather that morning was an indication that the day wasn't going to be an ordinary one. It was cool out and just a little bit rainy, and at approximately 9:30 a.m., Daniel arrived at his second job site for the day, located in the remote desert area. And that's when there he met up with Ken, who was a pump technician at a water resources company. And it was the first time that they were slated to actually work together, and Ken didn't personally know Daniel. But according to Ken, Daniel was just staring off into the distance at nothing in particular and saying things that kind of were just not making any sense. For example, he asked Ken if he wanted to go and to take a rest. And then just 15 minutes after he arrived, Daniel suddenly got into his Jeep and abruptly left the site without so much as a word. Now this story is about to get a lot deeper and a lot more mysterious, so if you like stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit that like button. And if you ever wanted to be a detective, now's your chance, because somebody out there might actually know where Daniel is. But back to the story, Ken informed the project manager of the strange occurrence, and then he eagerly awaited for an update about Daniel as he went about completing his task at that site. And when 3 o'clock rolled around, Ken was informed that nobody was able to make direct contact with Daniel. So Ken made his own attempt to go and locate him. And Ken, drove by the nearby road, east, which led back to their working site, and west, which led to this vast desert. And Ken observed what appeared to be tire tracks that were Daniel's, so he ended up following them west into the desert. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to locate the young man in his Jeep or any sign of him at all. And it was at this point that Daniel's father, David, had began to worry, because evening had came and he hadn't heard anything from Daniel since that morning. And it was completely out of character of Daniel to fall out of touch with his family and friends. By nightfall, David overcame with worry, made a call to the police department to report his son missing. So the officers then began to track down and contact those who had last seen Daniel. They headed to the work site and drove around searching for hours, but their efforts proved unsuccessful. And as the officers continued to investigate, stranger details emerged. According to David, Daniel has been acting a bit odd as of late. You see, David explained that Daniel had recently informed him that he was actually in love. However, he seemed to know very little about the woman, whom he identified only as Caitlyn. From there, the investigation led law enforcement to Daniel's close friend Luke. Luke had recently flown down to stay with Daniel for a weekend visit, and Luke recalled that Daniel had said something that struck him as unusual during his short trip. Because out at a bar, Daniel stated to Luke that he was glad he was visiting, as he confessed that he had been feeling depressed lately. But the conversation kind of just stopped right there, and then Luke flew back home. In fact, his last communication with Daniel had been on the 22nd, the day before Daniel went missing. So after that, investigators soon made contact with this Caitlyn, the woman who Daniel had told his father about. And the story that she told was quite alarming. And like always, more questions than were raised than answers. Caitlyn explained to law enforcement that she and a friend had only recently met Daniel. She said it was one evening and Daniel was working his part-time delivery job, and he had delivered a grocery order to Caitlyn's apartment. And at the time, both of the women were intoxicated, and as a result, they invited the stranger in to join them. Side note, ladies, I don't care how many tequila shots you've had, because that's what they were drinking here, but please, in real life, never do this. Even if a guy looks harmless and, you're just looking to have a good time, he might think differently. Please just always remember that. Okay, but Caitlyn explained the incident wasn't, of course, a normal occurrence, but considering that David wasn't large in stature and lacked his right hand, she assumed that he was harmless. And during the course of the night, they all had a lot of fun, and she and Daniel even exchanged phone numbers, and she sent Daniel a podcast that she thought he would really enjoy. But then she explained that the content of the messages from Daniel quickly escalated to more of a creepy tone, in her words. She said it wasn't long before he was telling her that he couldn't stop thinking about her and that he actually already loved her. And maybe Daniel was just alone for a long time, and this woman showed him, such embrace that he might have felt love at first sight. But the messages did strike Caitlyn as unsettling. And most frightening to Caitlyn was the fact that Daniel came to her apartment unannounced after explicitly being told not to come. And she said this made her very fearful. And she clearly expressed that sentiment to Daniel through text messages. Showing up uninvited was a sign of harassment, she said. So Caitlyn sent one last message to Daniel in response to his question, and he just simply asked if she hated him. And she replied to him that she did not hate him, but told him, just leave me alone. Then on the following day, just one day prior to when Daniel was last seen, he sent Caitlyn a cryptic final text message. And this is what it said. In the message, he said that he had to take some time and that he was not sure if he would see her again or not, but time would reveal their true bond. You can only imagine him probably suffering this heartbreak and Caitlyn being scared, him not knowing probably what to do or what's going on, how confused this young man might have been. And meanwhile, Daniel's poor family was growing frustrated. They felt like the investigation didn't take off as quickly as it should have, and they feared that they had lost valuable time. And finally, a request for a helicopter was approved. But to the disappointment of all involved, the search yielded no sign of Daniel or his vehicle. And as the days slowly passed and Daniel remained missing, his father could no longer just wait miles away. So he threw some of his belongings into his vehicle and he headed there with little resources and little funds. And he coordinated his own search efforts and investigation into his son's disappearance. That's a great dad, if you ask me. And over time, the police department eventually picked up the pace as well and launched an extensive search operation. Helicopters, cadaver dogs, and ground forces scoured approximately 70 square miles of pure desert. Yet absolutely no evidence was found. And that's when David soon hired a former police officer and crime investigator by the name of Jeff McGrath, who had an independent investigation practice. And then soon a development finally came. Daniel's Jeep was discovered, but nothing about the findings seemed to make any sense at all. The Jeep was located at the bottom of a 20-foot ravine, and it had been flipped onto its side, and oddly the driver's seat was still buckled, the airbags were deployed, and the vehicle showed obvious signs of significant damage. Daniel's belongings, including his wallet, his phone, his credit cards, were all found inside. And clothing items from the morning he was last seen were sprawled out on the ground. And within a few feet of that Jeep, there was t-shirts, jeans that had been turned inside out, an orange work vest, mismatched black socks, and work boots. And quite mysteriously, one of his other work boots was actually stuck underneath the Jeep. I mean, think about that. How is that even possible, along with the belt buckle still being held together in the driver's seat? And I say that, however, because despite the damage, no blood or any sign of Daniel or his remains were found. And Jeff later located another black sock 3 miles away from the scene in the desert area. It was quite perplexing, and it further reinforced the idea that there was much more to this story than met the eye. And then another shocking finding occurred. Near the location of the Jeep, a human skull was discovered. But upon further investigation, it was determined that the skull did not belong to Daniel. And this is where I need you guys in the comments, okay? What are the odds right where he crashed, there's a human skull? Seriously, I'm really asking, what are the odds? Like, let me know what you think the odds are in the comments. 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10. Let me know. And for the short-lived relief of the family and friends, the theory adopted by law enforcement was that Daniel had crashed his vehicle, undressed for an unknown reason, and abandoned the scene. And according to David, this was even more far-fetched because the police also said that they proposed Daniel had crashed in an attempt to disappear and join a monastery to become a monk. I'm not even joking. And as law enforcement saw it, a criminal investigation was unnecessary. I mean, given the extensive damage to the vehicle, they believed Daniel had caused it. So, contrary to the opinion of law enforcement, the significant damage to the vehicle was the precise reason David and his team suspected criminal activity, which they believe was undoubtedly what led to Daniel's disappearance, because they had observed that the vehicle's exterior was unusually clean, despite being in this desert location. Had the Jeep truly been there for an extended period of time? Okay, this case is confusing, but pay attention because things are about to get even more crazy. David believed that the vehicle had been deliberately wrecked, then dumped into the ravine. The theory was further reinforced after the disturbing black box GPS results were uncovered by Jeff. A crash had taken place approximately 4 hours after Daniel was last seen, causing the airbags to deploy. The vehicle was estimated to have been moving approximately at 30 miles per hour. And according to Jeff, there was no possible way a crash at that speed could have taken place in that particular area of the desert, considering the extremely rough terrain. Then from there, the vehicle was then driven another 11 miles. In addition to that, the ignition was turned an additional 46 times after the crash. Jeff also noted that the Jeep appeared to have been hit with a blunt object above the windscreen area. And another disheartening finding provided by the black box was that there actually had been multiple crashes? Seriously, does anybody know how that's possible? This thing has more twists than literally a Stephen King novel. But despite the discovery of the Jeep and everything else, the million-dollar question remained. What had become of Daniel? Well, you see, David and Jeff proposed that Daniel might have been upset about the situation with Caitlyn. And as a result, he binged on video games all night and through the early morning hours as well. And then once he had to arrive at his second work site, he drove a few miles into the desert just to take a nap. And that was when they believe everything had taken a drastic turn. They said that Daniel must have been in the worst place at the worst possible time and crossed paths with some form of evil. And then they could only speculate as to what transpired next. And while somewhere between 2 and 4 sets of human remains had turned up during these searches, there was the question that could a serial killer be using this secluded area as a dumping ground for their victims? Well, Jeff did not rule that idea out at all. In fact, he thought it could be related. And as more months seemed to just scroll by, David continued his search efforts despite the fact that he was exhausted and out of savings in his retirement funds. And sadly, the goal of the mission had changed. After 7 months, it was no longer a rescue mission, but rather a recovery mission out in the middle of the desert. David never bought into the idea that Daniel would disappear on his own. He always thought that somebody out there knew something, and he would not stop searching until he found his son. 3 years later, which brings us to now, in 2024, David Robinson, an Army veteran, is still searching for Daniel and has announced his plans to run for Congress in his home state of South Carolina in March. And also, you can look on their Facebook pages as well, where they routinely show them still searching in that secluded desert. And if he's elected, he says he plans to push for making the process easier for families to find their missing loved ones. Well, everybody, we always are looking for cases that can be solved. So maybe if you like this video and share it to enough people, who knows? Maybe there's a chance that enough sleuthing is done where we can actually find out what happened to Daniel. Wouldn't that be truly amazing? And if anybody watching this already knows something that could have happened to Daniel, please call the Buckeye Police Department in Arizona right now. And let's see if we, the Midnight Mafia, can actually close a case, or at least find a string of evidence to hold on to and just keep pulling at it until we finally reveal what's on the other end. And also, please don't forget to subscribe to my new channel, Shadows in the Wild, previously known as Mr. Ballen's Apprentice, and make sure to subscribe or follow my podcast on whatever podcast you listen to, whether it's Spotify or Apple. I love you guys. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.